big day today down in the States. Inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as president and vice president. And what that, it's a lot of collective sigh of relief for a lot of people, I think. Not so for others, I suppose. But it certainly has ramifications for Canada and what will happen up here. The relationship with the US, of course, is sometimes smooth, sometimes thorny, or probably more thorny than it is, even when we have presidents that are aligned, presidents and prime ministers that are aligned politically. It's still a rocky road sometimes. But one of the key things that we're looking at, or the hint that comes out first, is Biden will, in all likelihood, cancel the Keystone XL pipeline from central Alberta down into, I can't remember, Tennessee or somewhere, that it goes to export oil. And Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, of course, is quite concerned about this because that means jobs in Alberta. Todd, what's your take? You think that this will actually happen, and should we be concerned?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think to varying degrees, we should certainly be concerned. I think we should start at the very beginning, though, and it's a big day for our friends, we can call them again, to the south, because I think the relationship will return to friendlier terms. I certainly hope it will. I think there's, some big things that happen. First, Black female, first Asian female, first female in the executive branch of government. So that's a big deal down there. His speech this morning, I think, was compelling. I think it was interesting. I thought the poet laureate who performed was unbelievable. I was going to use some more colorful language there for a second and realize what we were doing, but she was great. That was really, really impressive. And then if we start talking about trade and opportunities and cross-border business dealings, I think there's an important thing to remember in that no matter what party is elected, there are always advisors that are advising these senior officials on different policy paths that they can take. So it's not necessarily the party that's deciding or a party that's deciding. It's some of their advisors that are providing very poignant rationales for why or why not something should happen. Now, there's something very interesting that was posted 2 days ago, I guess, when there was sort of a sniff that KXL might be halted on day one. And that was just the sheer number of US pipelines that are either in the final stage of approval or are moving forward or will be granted assent to move forward. And so the challenging part of this discussion, and I suspect this is part of Jason Kenney or Premier Kenney's issue, is if one pipeline is being stopped that's carrying Canadian crude for our own purposes, why then is this not a larger discussion about all the pipelines down in the US? And I think there's significant evidence to prove why they're halting KXL, or why KXL is always one of the hot button topics, not the least of which is the crossing on Indigenous lands. But it's also that it's a Canadian pipeline. So it's not really a quote unquote green conversation. And I don't mean the Green Party, I mean environmentally concerning. It's not a green discussion. It's a nationalist discussion.
Yeah, Tracy, your thoughts on whether the pipeline could be canceled? And I know a lot of the pundits on this side of the border get all excited about it, but I think it's probably a bigger issue up here than it is down there.
Yeah, I think that he campaigned on canceling it in many areas, and I don't see how he gets out of canceling it without doing some damage to the trust that he was building with the folks that voted for him specifically on that single issue. But honestly, I think the most important change we're going to see is an actual grown-up trying to deal with the COVID pandemic in the US. And that will have a huge impact on Canada. If in fact the US can really get things under control down there, it won't feel so much like living upstairs from a meth lab for Canadians anymore. It will maybe feel like they really are our friends and we are all in this together again. I think focusing on getting the pandemic under control has to be more important than any other topic that's out there. And I'm no expert on pipelines. I recognize that it will certainly have impacts in Alberta. but it would have impacts in the US, and more oil has impacts in other ways. So I don't know. I think Jason Kenney has other issues on his plate rather than just the cancellation of Keystone. I don't know, listening to his talk about coal mining is blowing my mind at the moment. So I'm not super sympathetic to Jason Kenney's concerns.
Yeah, we heard last week that the Kenney government quietly got rid of, I can't remember, it was the Coal Act or something like that, but it basically brought in by Peter Lougheed to protect the eastern slopes of the Rockies in Alberta from major development. So he's angered just about everyone over in southwestern Alberta, from ranchers to fishermen to outdoor enthusiasts, the snowmobilers, even communities. I think I saw one there where one of the communities along there, the mayor said, geez, you need public consultation to change a parking spot here in our town, and then this happens without any consultation. Todd, any thoughts on where that's going and how that fits into our reducing greenhouse gas emissions and all that kind of fun stuff?
Well, I think first and foremost, I would be shocked if anything moved forward. I think what you need to do is look at the trends over the previous elections and see what Southern Alberta, which direction Southern Alberta has been voting. And it's certainly not favorites to the UCP or the previous Conservative or the previous Wild Rose party. So I see that more as a political pawn that's being moved off of the table. That is a chip that they can play possibly in a KXL discussion, possibly in deferring some of the challenges they're facing with COVID in Alberta as well. So there's movement there. Not to say that there isn't a larger discussion to be had. Coal mining is reasonably antiquated in most places in the world, or completely phased out in most places of the world. That's why I don't read too much into this more than this is a political chess maneuver on their part.
The problem with these kinds of moves, don't you think, is that people are playing chess with issues that directly tie into people's day-to-day lives or massive existential threats to humanity. And I think playing politics with that is not serving the people that you're elected to represent. It's only making things harder to move forward with. And so when I heard about coal, on the one hand, they're changing legislation late on a Friday afternoon before a long weekend in the middle of a pandemic that's going to allow them to completely change the landscape, not to mention the dangers from leaching into water of selenium and anything else that coal mining does. But then on the other hand, Alberta is touting the fact that they're moving away from coal and that this is part of their, green new plan for Alberta. I am sick to death of politicians and policy speaking out of both sides of their mouths. I've just had it.
And therein lies a huge, huge problem, right? And I think we've had this discussion quite rigorously on some of these Wednesday calls, where we sort of say it would be great to have that sort of direct line of decency where somebody says, I want to do this and this is what's going to happen, and then sort of follow through on it. And you noted, Joe Biden campaigning on halting KXL. You're a former Ontarian. I'm a former Ontarian. I go back to Paul Martin, who campaigned very strongly on the significant changes he was going to make to the public service. And then on day one, started implementing those changes, and everyone said, well, what are you doing? So, there's two sides to this coin. There's the politicians who campaign, I think, honestly and loudly on what they want to do, and then face some significant backlash on actually implementing those ideas, or maybe implementing too quickly those ideas. And then there's those who campaign on a promise that never comes to fruition, or comes to fruition on day, 364 of the fourth year.
Campaign on something, then you better live up to it, in my view.
We've got to a more reasonable place, I think, in our politics, where a lot of people are definitively paying attention, and a wider spectrum of demographics are paying attention now too.
That's key. I really think we're about to see a real generational shift in leadership all over the place, and politics and museums can be slow to catch up with that. Folks in those roles tend to stay forever. not necessarily to the health of their parties or their organizations, but I really think that we are about to see a generational shift in who's holding the reins of power, if for no other reason than people are dying.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I hate to give Trump credit for anything, but one thing you have to acknowledge that with his presidency is that he did basically what he said he was going to do. It was all wacko stuff, but I don't think there was much hidden there. When he got in, he did, he wanted to shut down the borders. He wanted to have a ban on Muslims and all that kind of stuff, and that's what he did. Right? So
you can be horrified, but you don't get to be shocked with him.
Yeah. So like what Todd was saying, I think there's not an appetite for Trumpism, I don't think, but there's an appetite for politicians doing what they say they're going to do. Get in.
There's an appetite for accountability, I think, is the biggest piece of this equation. And he might have did what he said he was going to do to some degree. I still suspect that of the 75 million people who voted for him, a larger chunk of those were well-to-do people who wanted tax cuts to go a little bit deeper, more so than white nationalists who wanted to see less people of color in positions of power. But there's a huge subset of his voters that were certainly of that ilk. But the accountability to me piece is sort of what reigns supreme. And I think, in our day-to-day lives, we don't have the ability to turn to our supervisors or our members or our patrons and say, just give me 3 years to figure this out and we'll get back to you. I mean, I'd be fired in a heartbeat. I don't know about anybody else if I said I need 3.5 years to figure out this issue, particularly with a well-paid bureaucracy that are generally experts behind you. So I think the accountability piece is going to become such a profound and prolific discussion in all of our elections for the foreseeable future. And to Tracy's point, we're going to see a lot more young people very, very, very engaged in this process. That the housing affordability crisis is not going anywhere. I mean, to come up with a down payment now is quite prohibitive if you're paying $1,800, $19,000, $2,000 a month in rent. How are you supposed to save that on whatever the salary is? So there's a number of issues that are going to lead younger people into politics, and middle-aged or older people better start taking notice of what some of these issues are and course correcting, or there's a much larger shift that's coming.
Yeah. And the other part of it is simply demographics, right? The baby boom generation is starting to fade off into the sunset. And I hate to say that because I'm part of the baby boom generation myself, right at the very tail end of it, but there I am. So there are younger people that have to come in, have to get involved, and I think that's part of the switch we're seeing now. Is that it's hard for older people. Of course, when you get older, you get more set in your ways, and then you got younger people come in and have different ideas, right? And that's part of the challenge for us, is to embrace that other people have other ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think old white guys have ever been very good at listening to anybody that didn't look like them in the mirror. And that really is a generational thing. It's changing.
It is, yeah.
As a 51-year-old white woman who's grown up in business dealing with that older generation, I faced sexism just as a woman. I cannot imagine complicating that by being a woman of color or by having any other of the myriad of challenges that many really important leaders have faced. I hope that our generation, the Gen Xer world that are sitting in some of the seats of power right now, have a better view of all of the inclusivity issues that need to really be addressed if we're going to continue to further humanity and society as a whole.
Mm-hmm. So that's a good.
There's a nice mix that happens there. Sorry, Bill. There's a nice mix, I think, that happens there too. I think you need the youth energy and ideas of forward looking, and you need the learned experience and challenges that have come along the ways too. I think there's always those fights or arguments that you'll see about, they don't know, they haven't been around long enough to know. Well, they know, but they know it from a different side, and you can't discount what their learned knowledge is, but they also have to appreciate some of the hard work that's taken others to get to these points, and maybe some of the value that they bring to the discussion too.
Yeah.
I bet I was 50 before I recognized that. It's when I realized I wasn't a young up and comer anymore. I had to think about that a little bit.
What's that?
Yeah, that was one of the one of the adjustments for me when I was going through and I moved from a reporter to being an editor, is to let other reporters who are usually younger than me report how they wanted to, and I was there to guide them. I wasn't there to tell them to do it the way I did it, because that's what I did, right? So
one of the things we're tackling internally here at the museum, our plan is to start really entering into the curation of in-house exhibits in a different way in our reiteration of the museum. And it's about giving young people the opportunity to explore some of these topics, to really get into some of the controversies and the meat of these subjects from a Northern BC perspective. So yeah, I think empowering youth to talk about what they're talking about and learning from them is going to be really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And as much as we fear that the younger generation coming up doesn't have the ability to do it, we got to rest assured in the knowledge that that our forefathers probably had the same fears about us coming up and taking over things and running
They
things.
did about me.
Well, and you're only going to learn by experience and by, I don't want to say failure necessarily, but I've learned more through my accidents, happy or otherwise, than I have from any of my successes.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the great teacher, right? Experience. That's how you learn. I often joked as an editor, if I had two resumes on my desk and one had a master's degree from Ryerson and was just graduating, and another one spent 2 years in Fort St. James, I'd probably take the person who spent 2 years in Fort St. James, because they had experience and they would experience everything, right, in a small town.
Most people don't take anything from Ryerson anyway.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Says the Ontario guy.
Yeah. Well, I did hire a reporter from there once, and his father was a teacher there, but he went on to become a lawyer. So journalism to a lawyer, you're still on the bottom of the most liked professions in the world anyway. So
I was still there when it was a polytechnic.
Oh, wow.
Showing your age there, Todd. And Bill, I happen to really like journalists. I don't think you guys are low.
Well, thank you. We don't either. Man, I got to run. I think there's an ambulance going on. Got to fight off my lawyer friend.
One business card, two sides.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But anyways, we got way off topic here. One of the other things to get us back down to, and one of the other things that's going on in federal politics is the pending expulsion of Derek Sloan from the Conservative caucus for apparently accepting a campaign donation from a well-known white supremacist. So, Todd, any thoughts on this? As of course, Derek Sloan's been well known for saying some really oddball stuff anyways, but
yeah, first, good. Then let's work on censure. I don't think there's any place in any position of power for that type of thought. Those types of beliefs, I think, as we've seen from, as Tracy puts it, the meth lab beneath us over the last 4 years, that's troubling stuff. And I'm trying to think of the words that were used this morning. We need to turn down the temperature, I believe is what Joe Biden said. And, there's a way that conspiracy theories and hate mongering really turns up the temperature, because the people who have those beliefs are so enraged and so fired up and feel so left behind that when you use that type of language, when you put people with those beliefs in positions of power and positions to amplify their message, it only drives that further and further. And we don't have a place for that. We've come a long way. Let's be honest, a very long way. But we have a very, very long way still to go. And we can't allow that to continue on. If that's their beliefs, keep it at home. It has no place out in the public spectrum. I would hope that they don't have those beliefs at home, but there's nothing you can do to stop somebody from their own free thought. And it's unfortunate that it still exists. And he has made some incredibly challenging statements in his reasonably short political career. Some of those likely got him elected, and that's even more unfortunate. Mm-hmm. So now the move needs to be to rid themselves of it.
Yeah. Tracy, how do you turn down the temperature on these kind of things?
Well, I think objectively, it's actually a really small group of people that truly believe the kinds of hate that we're talking about here. It's just that Todd's right. It's been vocal because it's been greenlit by the head of the United States for four and a half years now. And so by giving oxygen to those voices, it creates this permission for people who maybe never thought of themselves as being involved in hate to start to express views that are further that direction than perhaps not. I feel like turning the temperature down. Well, Twitter did it. They were the grown up in the room on the 6th when they shut down Trump's Twitter account. And him not having that megaphone to spew hate has already turned the temperature down to some degree. And I really think that Biden and Harris will continue to not permit the kind of language that's inflammatory to be socially acceptable and broadly acceptable. I think that we run a challenge with some of the mainstream, all media, not knowing where to turn next for their next story. Because I said it myself when we listened to Trudeau talking about the relationship that he was building with Biden. Oh, good, we're going back to boring politics. This is what I'm interested in, is boring politics. I don't have to watch the news every minute of my life. Yeah. And that's going to cause a problem for some of these outlets. So turning down the temperature is not just a political leadership thing. It has to happen, all of us on these panels. It has to happen at the media level, in print and on TV and digital. I think all of us just need to take that deep breath right now and give everybody some time, because I don't think that the amount of coverage we see of hate is indicative of the number of people that actually believe it.
It was so interesting as I was watching parts of the inauguration this morning, and you mentioned Twitter, and they would pan out across the mall to all the flags that were established, and it would pan the smaller crowd, everyone distanced in groups of ones or twos or whatever your sort of personal grouping was. And it struck me that, the former, and I'll use Lester Holt's comment this morning, the former 2-term indicted private citizen would have been going absolutely mad on Twitter, talking about how nobody showed up and the crowds were sparse and nobody cares. And, it was the right thing to do, because it's not about the person, it's about the position. So no matter who was inaugurated today, it was about moving forward. That was the plan. And so whether, 85 million people show up to the mall to watch it, or 115 million people watching on TV, is inconsequential to the role that needs to be played. And what that translated to me was the role that social media played in shutting down those accounts. And you're right, everyone has a role to play in tempering those messages going forward, because certainly in the US, segments of the media fired up those messages and used that as catalysts for advertising sales. And it's unfortunate that they went that route. I get that that's their foundation of their business, but there's a level of responsibility that everybody involved in that has to take.
Yeah, I think that we also have to recognize as individuals that we need to make room for people who perhaps have been misled by this movement that was guided by Trump. We have to make room for them to rejoin what we consider to be regular thinking and regular societal thought. And they have to be able to do that in a way that allows them to save some face. Because someone who's been fully invested in Trump Nation in whatever country you're in or whatever iteration that takes in your local community, they're in a position now where how do you rejoin? If you're going to just be called names or made fun of or ostracized. So we also need to, as individuals, find ways to allow folks that perhaps we've had vehement disagreements with in the past over key core ideological issues. We have to give them a way to rejoin and to recommit and re-engage with community and politics at large.
What were the two things you never discussed in public? Religion and politics. And you know, the discussion of both of those things kind of really merged together. I don't even think they merged. There was a head-on collision of those two things several years ago, and it became so normalized.
There's a show I watched early on in the pandemic on Netflix called Behind the Curve, and it's all about the flat earth movement and that conspiracy. And I would encourage everyone who's looking for an hour and a half of really educational programming, watch it, because it talks about how people wind up deep into these conspiracies and how it's next to impossible to disavow them because you have to walk away from this new family and friends that you've made. It's a really educational piece. I really encourage you to watch it, and it's entertaining at the same time.
Yeah, that's one thing I was looking at is how do you get those in the States, 72 million people or whatever has voted for Trump. So, and I'm sure not all of them are rabid extremists. It still boggles my mind that that many people would vote for Trump. But how do you bring all those people back into the fold? How do you make those people feel like they're part of the process? I think talked about many times in many areas. A lot of these people that vote for Trump, one of Trump's appeals was that he represented everybody who wasn't represented by the Washington elite or whoever it is, right? And and here in Canada, we've got the Laurentian elite, and who's represented by them, and all that kind of stuff. So or that's the challenge, I guess, for the leaders on both sides of the country is bringing those people, making those people feel like they're part of the country, that they're part of what's going on. So that is the challenge. So I don't know. I'm not sure how you do that, but
It's acceptance of everybody's ability for free thought, though, right? I mean, I think we've all had discussions with people who either are all in for vaccines or are not interested in the vaccine for whatever the reason is. It's the same as, I don't align politically with some people and they don't align politically with me. It doesn't mean I think any less of them. It doesn't mean I don't want to hear their opinions. It doesn't mean I don't want to have a friendship with somebody. I mean, I can respect somebody from a different political belief structure because I like the person at their core. Mm-hmm. Their politics, their religion does not define them as an individual in this world. It's a portion of who they are, but it's not their core personality. And we need to get back to an understanding of that.
Yeah. People also have to get involved. And it doesn't matter which party we're talking about here. There's so little appetite in Canada for political organization out of the sort of main urban centers. And then folks that live in rural Canada decry the fact that they are not heard and that they don't have a voice and that the politicians aren't serving them. But folks need to actually get involved. And that doesn't just mean at election time by going to vote. And as important as that is, if you don't have candidates to vote for and policy issues being moved up through the parties and into Parliament, then I can see why people are disengaged. But I think young people right now are very engaged. Like if Trump did anything, he inspired people to pay attention because you either loved him or hated him. And so now we have really informed, educated folks in a much larger number. Now they just need to continue to get involved. And I think that the calm that we are heading into with leadership in the US is going to be dangerous in that it could just allow folks to think the problem is solved and walk away. And it's not. 2 years out, there's going to be another push for elections in the midterms in the US. And who knows who's running for president in 4 years.
The cycle starts tomorrow.
Yeah, let the campaigning begin.
Yeah, midterms are right around the corner.
And who knows, we have a federal writ drop too, just for fun.
Yeah, we could have an election in this country too. That's
I'm less believing in that now with the challenges around vaccine delays.
I sure hope you're right, because I think an election's a dumb plan.
might not be Trudeau's plan though. That's the thing. The fun with a minority government, right? So, yeah. What about the vaccine delays? All of a sudden, we hear yesterday like, okay, yeah, we're a couple weeks, nothing's going to happen. So, should be upset? Would we be upset at our leaders for that, or is that just what happens?
I'm kind of annoyed with Pfizer. I don't understand how they could have not known long ago that they were shutting down their Belgian warehouse or factory in order to do renovations. So I'm assuming that that's why they told folks in their initial contract that they had to reserve that second shot, because that was always the complaint coming out of Quebec and Ontario, that they couldn't just give all the first shots to everybody and wait for the delivery of the second one. I have to assume Pfizer knew they were shutting down but didn't tell anybody else. I don't know. It's weird to me.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Todd, do you have any insights on that?
I spoke to somebody very early on, I think just as the first vaccines were coming online or nearly coming online. And they said, my biggest fear is that the Canadian government is not going to order enough vaccines. And I should note this person is a medical professional. I fear that they're not going to order enough vaccines. The rollout's going to be flawed and too much is being provided to the provinces to manage as opposed to a federal rollout program that then everyone follows, because it then standardizes the process and makes sure that we're hitting those targets correctly. And unfortunately, right on point A and right on point B. So there is certainly some blame to be provided to the federal government for not ordering enough vaccines and maybe in a timely time. It will be interesting to see what happens to stockpiles of vaccines, as I suspect the new U.S. government will be pushing quite hard for larger quantities, quicker turnarounds, and may take a precedence over other countries because of their buying power. So there's got to be some accountability that gets laid on the federal government for this.
On two fronts. One, I know we ordered more than we needed in terms of vaccines from all different companies at the point where we didn't know who was going to be approved first. That much I've heard from media. I don't have any inside line on that. But healthcare is provincial. If the federal government waded in and said, we're going to come and rescue you all and start putting injections in people's arms, everyone would be up in arms that the federal government was overstepping their jurisdictional bounds.
So why do we have Health Canada? If they're just administering funds out to regional health operatives, then it's a ridiculous program that could fall into a different operating category. I've gone back and forth on this quite a bit, and I get it. And we talk about it a lot with the U.S. when they talk about states' rights, and the provinces have their rights to manage here. And our premier reached out to the federal government to say, "Oh, can you block travel into our province?" And the prime minister said, look at the Maritimes. They did it themselves. You do it yourself. However, we are in what we hope is a once in a lifetime pandemic. These are those opportunities for leadership to stand up and say, you know what? We do have a significant role to play here. We have a disproportionate role to play here. We are the ones that are ordering all these vaccines. We are the ones that are predominantly providing all of the recovery and security benefits that are going out to people. Why should they then not be the ones who are dictating the administration of those vaccines?
I don't disagree with you, but I see what that would look like in terms of the mushroom.
We already know Premier Kenney and Premier Moe would take immediate issue with it because it would be another Eastern Canadian rule falling on Western Canadians. Mm-hmm. And, we were just talking about why do we have to play political games? I mean, there's a huge political game right there. But it's once in a lifetime, we hope. We got to make some decisions.
The science is not looking like this is a one round deal. This is like coronavirus is here to stay, and we will be doing annual vaccinations. So getting this sorted out is probably a key priority.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is the tough, it's the age-old battle in this country, right? Between the provinces and Ottawa, who's responsible for what. And like Todd mentioned, healthcare is one of the ones that's really a weird kind of setup. We have Health Canada that oversees something, but the provinces actually deliver the healthcare. But on the other hand, you do want national standards, I think, for health and these kind of things. I think it's important to have those standards.
Yeah, just look at our long-term care homes and the situation there. And Canadians all across the country are clamoring for national standards there.
Yeah, absolutely. So where that lies, I don't know. And then, but part of it is also Ottawa putting more money into the provinces for health. Like we get tired of the provinces screaming for more money, and we forget that it wasn't too long ago that Ottawa funded much larger percentage of the province's health bills. Those transfers have been reduced. I think that probably goes back to Paul Martin that you talked about. He was probably the one that started, or maybe even Mulroney started that. Sort of chipping away at how much we give to the provinces for health. And so we all know what downloading means and does, and we see that now. So where the solution lies, I don't really know. But
changed since Confederation, it's probably time to think about some of these major divisions of labor and decide what's actually going to work, because we don't have extra dollars. And so any duplication, I don't think makes any sense. And Canadians are entitled to the same healthcare, whether they are in Nunavut or Prince George or Brampton. They should have exactly the same access to healthcare everywhere.
Yeah, that is one of the nice things about this country, is we do have that. So that's one of the things that
healthcare is not the same in Indigenous communities as it is in Prince George, and healthcare in Prince George is not the same as healthcare in downtown Toronto.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, and actually, I knew an emergency room physician once, and he went down to work down the States, and that was one of the things he said is that the healthcare itself is actually probably the best down the States if you can afford it or if you have a plan. That's the problem. There's probably about 30 or 40% of the population down there that's in the middle that can't afford it and doesn't get the healthcare. But the healthcare itself, best in the world down there. So
all it takes is money, right?
All it takes is money, and that's we see that up here too, right? It's the money, and how do we get that? So
it's also tying, like, a provincial responsibility for healthcare then gets tied to the politics in the individual provinces and territories. And so then you can have very different spending, very different policy, completely different pressures on whoever it is that's making decisions. Whereas if it was healthcare was national and it was for Canada as a whole, you don't run into the problems like we've had in long-term care, where you bring a for-profit entity into healthcare and then expect them to put the patient first. I think it needs to be federal, personally.
There's another piece of this whole equation that ties into it too, and it's the opioid epidemic. I mean, here's another case where Health Canada sets out guidelines. Provinces are mandated to put in place, harm reduction strategies, treatment facilities, whatever that might be. But there's no sort of unifying standards that say, per 10 individuals, you need X amount of recovery beds in your community, whatever that might look like. And so we end up in situations similar to Prince George, where we're sorely, or Northern BC really, we're sorely lacking mental health treatment and addictions treatment beds and facilities. We have an abundance of harm reduction programs and strategies that are available, but there's two sides to this equation. There's more than two sides. There's many sides to these equations, and I think we've gone so whole hog into the harm reduction side of healthcare that we've forgotten any of the addictions treatment and mental health recovery sides of it, which from a recidivism standpoint needs to be strongly looked at. And that's maybe where, again, that divide between the federal arm of Health Canada and our provincial health bodies could probably have a really strong dialogue about what that future looks like.
Mhm. And just getting back to what we were talking about, that, and that is one of the problems. You know, the more, you know, if we have a one single healthcare, is that the administration of it, when you have it's more centralized, all those local things like dealing with downtown issues in Prince George get further removed from the people that are making decisions sometimes. So that's a tough one too. But along those lines, the Committee on Poverty Reduction, or whatever it was, the Poverty Committee at the city released its 22 recommendations to council to deal with these issues. I don't know if you've seen any of those, Todd or Tracy.
I haven't reviewed them, no.
Yeah, I know. I haven't taken a deep enough dive to articulate an answer.
Yeah, I haven't either, really. So we'll move on.
Oh, so you were looking for a little bit of coaching here.
I was hoping I could just throw a question out and you talk on it for 20 minutes.
Nice try there. No, you haven't read that one.
Yeah, but you know, at least they got the recommendations out, and what I sort of scanned of them is you know, a lot of the same sort of stuff. There wasn't really much in there that was that I saw that was new or revelatory. It's a lot of the stuff we already know to do, and we've got to keep doing it. So,
well, let's circle back to the near beginning of this conversation. We need fresh ideas.
Yeah.
What's been done is proven out to not work. I think we need a lot of fresh ideas.
Yeah.
I don't know if all of the work that's been recommended around mental health and folks that are struggling with addictions, I don't know that we've ever really implemented all of the recommendations that have been made by the myriad of reports that have been done, certainly not in my lifetime. We give it a little bit of money, we give it a little bit of attention, and then we move on. And we have the luxury of being able to move on. The people that are living those lives don't. And so it continues to be a problem. It continues to breed additional problems. It impacts people who aren't struggling with an addiction of their own because it impacts them at their businesses or in their families. I don't know that we've ever really truly invested the kind of time and empathy that's necessary to address this issue as a society.
I couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah.
Getting as many voices and as many good ideas down, but really executing those ideas needs to be a concerted effort of all, because the impacts of it are not just one dimensional. It's like you say, it's not the individual on the street who's struggling with mental health that's related to trauma early on in their life or some other aspects. And now they're addicted to opioids, or they're smoking crack, or they've been prostituted out. I mean, these issues are so large and the impacts run so deep that, you know, again, it's one of those things. If there was an easy solution, everybody would be doing it. So we know there's not an easy solution. We know it's a challenging discussion, but a challenging process to get there. But boy, if you could put the right amount of time, effort, and money and people behind it, what would that look like in our community?
I think people need to really internalize the lesson that we just got from COVID, in that every human being on this planet is inextricably intertwined, and it doesn't matter where you live. And so this person who is struggling on the street is no different to you as an organism than the kid you're tucking into bed at night. And if we're not taking care of all of us, we're not taking care of any of us. And so when you talk about sending foreign aid to another country to invest in girls' education, or we are making sure that a poor country has enough vaccinations for COVID for their population, and I hear complaints about, we need to start at home, there's too much going on at home. We are all in it together on every level. And if people could internalize that, Todd, I think the kinds of challenges that you're talking about would suddenly become much more prescient and certainly more pressing for people. And that would get them the attention they need. But until we see it as all of us being one big organism on the entire planet, and the planet being part of that organism, we're going to continue to try and cherry pick out the things we like and that are convenient or affordable, and ignore the impacts of all of those things.
Yeah, it's tough, and I know that's one of the things that I've seen. I think we've all seen it. It's too easy to hear go downtown and for whatever reason, you just avoid your eyes. You put your blinders on when you go down to see everybody lined up at St. Vincent de Paul's or sleeping in the street, and just move on with your day. And you're quite right. We've got to. It's not that you have to stop and help somebody on the street, but we should all be looking at, so how can I help? Whether that's supporting some of these organizations that are trying to help, that are dealing with people that are down on the street. They need the help too, because for a lot of us, we really don't know what to do. And if you've ever been confronted by someone who is having a mental health episode, it can be a pretty frightening thing. So you don't want to get involved, at that level.
But our RCMP officers have to,
Yeah.
our business owners have to. And if we're not dealing with the issue, they're going to have to continue to deal with it. It's silliness to me to not look at it holistically.
Yeah, we're putting the management of this on the hands of, like you mentioned, police officers, bylaw officers, fire department, firefighters, paramedics, and business owners, and patrons to those businesses. That none of them are addictions recovery specialists. None of them are mental health professionals. I shouldn't say none. A very, very, very small section of them are specialists in these fields. And to Bill's point, if you ever see it, it is one of the scariest things you will see in your life. And you know that there's no stopping something very, very dangerous from happening if you're there at the wrong time.
The other thing to recognize is that when we're talking about mental health, it isn't just the people on the street that don't have access to it. I have had cause in my own family with people very close to me to have to seek out mental health support for individuals, and good luck finding it, even when you have a full benefits program, or you say, I don't care and I'm willing to pay. The professionals do not exist. And so,
or right now when they're not taking patients, there's so many phone appointments. And how does somebody that's struggling with depression, which is, a mental illness, that can only meet with a mental health professional over the phone? I mean, that's probably not a great solution.
And no guarantee you're going to get the same mental health professional every time you call in on your EAP or whatever. So then we're not really providing the level of service that people need. And that spins back to the notion of there not being national standards. And the fact that it is not the same for a Canadian in Prince George as it is for a Canadian in Vancouver.
And it will be the biggest battle coming out of COVID or dealing with the iteration of COVID that stays with us. The mental health challenges from this are going to be insurmountable. And I think the biggest fight that many generations will have.
Yeah. And a lot of it comes back once again to money and resources, dealing with the, people like down on downtown Prince George are having problems. One, you've got to put resources into it, and that means people, and you've got to pay people who are trained and get them and are down there that can do that work, and that takes money, and that means taxes, and that means foregoing possibly some of our big projects that we got on the go, and that's probably a philosophical or a fundamental shift in our society.
Why does it always have to mean taxes? Why are we not looking at these problems differently? Why are we not connecting with the corporate community? Why are we not looking for grants, loans, other mechanisms? It can't, the answer can't always be taxes, and the answer shouldn't always be taxes.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the other discussions that will come up in all of our future elections is, how do we change the discussion around taxes and fees to partnerships and opportunities?
Yeah.
I think people need to understand that taxes pay for the things that they need every day and want every day. There's nothing more frustrating to me than screaming and yelling about wanting smaller government and less taxes. And then the next is, why are there so many potholes? And I want better service and I want more access.
Right. But if the bureaucracy grew by 10% in the same token, you have to ask your question. The parallels exist there. And if we talk about service level policy, which is exactly how taxes are generally derived, there's a question or a conversation that should happen around that too.
Yeah, I agree. There's efficiencies to be had, but I think we need to go all the way back, throw out all the precedent, and start re-looking at how we deliver services to Canadians at all levels of government. When Confederation was set up, there was an entire order of government that didn't even exist, Indigenous governments, which also have a ton of challenges that need to be addressed. And I think that taxpayers in Canada pay what we pay in tax. We could do a better job of utilizing that to avoid the duplication of effort. I mean, I've spent my career running an organization that is a charity. We are very good at finding efficiencies, and there's an awful lot of people in the nonprofit world across this country that are talented money managers, but we're discounted because we run charities. And so, it's not necessarily always going to be the Fortune 500 business that makes the best business choices, when essentially you need to think of the Canadian government as a charity.
Mhm. And that's one of the things that I've always kind of joked at, is that we have a lot of people who think they're very good business or money managers because they did well in good times. The real challenge is in challenging times, how to do that kind of thing, right? How to make things work when money isn't rolling in like there's no tomorrow.
I had a great conversation of that note yesterday when we talked about communications challenges. And, as a former communications person, we were saying, it's great when times are good. You put those messages out, you get those interviews, you dial up your messaging, it's all great. But the measure of it is during a crisis. Yeah. How do you communicate? What's the messaging? How often? How do you strategize through those challenges? And that truly is exactly like you're saying. It's easy to say, we have $20 million in revenue. We're doing great. Things are awesome. Well, we've got a $10 million loss. What do we do?
Yeah. Well, I lived that. We, at the Free Press, we lost the car dealers, we didn't lose them. The car dealers shrunk in 2008 and 2009, and our strategy was they'll come back. Mm-hmm. And I shook my head at it at the time, but that was, they'll come back, they'll come back. Well, they come back at about 40% of what they were. So, and we did nothing really in the interim to try to offset that. That was our business plan, was that it'll come back.
I just had a conversation yesterday nationally with colleagues that I think that that's a problem that the entertainment industry is now facing with coming out of COVID. Even on the back end of it, with vaccines in your arm, it's still a much lower number that are intending to come back. And if people don't think about changing their entire operation and how they're going to serve the community, it's not going back to the way it was. The old business model will not work.
Yeah.
The positive side of bad times is you really have an opportunity to reevaluate how and what. And if you don't, then you're getting left behind.
Yeah, exactly. And on that note, we're coming up on an hour. So once again, an hour flies by, and we covered a lot of ground today. We started out one way, went the other, which is always good. So want to thank Tracy and Todd once again, and for everybody else who was out there was watching. And thought we'll give anybody any parting comments. I always like to do that. Quick plug for something before we go.
Well, I'm pretty happy that it's January 20th, and I am doing the deep sigh of relief. And I will tell you that I will do a plug. Western Financial came in here today and donated $5,000 to the Exploration Place towards our Living Evolution project. And they are the first corporate money into this. And I am just so excited and thrilled. I can't wait to share it with the whole community.
Right on.
That's awesome. That's great news. Love to hear those stories. Love to see good community partnerships and good community corporate giving programs that are going towards programs that we all desperately want and need. So that's great. Congratulations. I will plug it one more time. True North is on Monday. It's virtual, so we do still have tickets available. It'd be trivial if I said, there's only 10% of the tickets left, so make sure you get in fast to try and drive ticket sales. There's lots of opportunity available for people to join. We have some amazing panels, some amazing discussions around our shared path forward post-COVID and what our economy will look like, certainly more specifically here in Northern BC. pgchamber.bc.ca.
Super. And once again, thanks everyone. I don't have any plugs, specific plugs, but yeah, it's good to see everybody. Yeah, nice day January 20th, I think everybody's breathing a bit of a sigh of relief, or hope, I suppose, that things will be a little more calmer moving forward. So on that note, we will see everyone next week, and thanks once again.